This mini presentation is on whole school reform or comprehensive school reform. Now this idea is one that has been around for a while, but really has taken hold with the advent of No Child Left Behind. And basically what it is it's the idea of totally transforming a school really through top-down measures. In today's world, mainly punitive measures. Prior to that, it was most of the reforms were done for monetary gain by the districts through grant money or something like that. So now we're going to look at this idea of whole school or comprehensive school reform in today's world. The essentials that I want you to think about as we go through, and those that will be posted on the discussion board, are as follows. One, what are the essential elements of this reform? What does whole school reform have to include in order to be successful? The second question that I want you to think about is, what roles do the various stakeholders play in this? The federal government, district administration, school administration, teachers, all that stuff. What role do they all play in the process of the reform? What barriers exist to reform? And I think a lot of times what you'll see is the barriers are very attitudinal in nature. Moving on with the essential questions, there's an article I'd like you to read that's called Moving Toward a Whole School Reform, What the Principal Can Do. It was written in 1993. And as you read it, I want you to think about, are the suggestions put forth or the framework put forth in that article, do they still apply today? Another article I'd ask you to read, and there's really the only two that I'd like you to read, talks about the idea of divine dissatisfaction. And I want you to think about, what does that, the concept of divine dissatisfaction, have to do with the dynamic approach to reform and the ongoing process of whole school reform. And finally, are whole school reform models one size fits all? Can you take a reform model from a school in, say, Bemidji and apply it to a school in Salt Lake City? Can you take reforms used in a school in rural Alaska and apply it to downtown Chicago? So are these reforms one size fits all, or should they be really more focused on the school itself? Now, many of the reforms that we think of look like this. And if you read the caption, it says, unfortunately, we're approaching the expiration date on most of the quick fix solutions. All too often, many in the teaching field see reform movements come and go, and they're really just kind of quick fixes. How do we, in today's world, how do we improve reading scores or math scores? Whole school reform is more of a top-down approach, and like I said, mainly now is done in a punitive nature. One of the leading faces in reform is the former chancellor of the Washington, D.C. schools, Rhee. She now runs her own nonprofit organization, but during her tenure in Washington, D.C., she did many things that upset teachers' unions, the community, and she, according to her, boasted great successes. Unfortunately, like with many statistics, those things can be up for debate. So if you'd like to learn more about this, I think you should check out some of the work of Rhee and some of her ideas. As we go on, looking at goals of whole school reform, what are they supposed to do? All the citations, again, that are in here, I've listed them next to the points, can be found in the articles posted on the discussion board as well. Anyway, goals of whole school reform: to transform low-performing schools into high-performing schools, really through a top-down approach. Some of these reforms are done proactively, others are done in a punitive nature by not meeting certain standards. Another goal is to ensure high student achievement for all, to make sure that all kids learn, and finally to comply with federal regulations, benchmarks, mandates, things like that, namely No Child Left Behind. Even in this world of waivers, the idea of whole school reform is ubiquitous. Through Race to the Top grants, multiple different reform initiatives, really in our state, the Minnesota Department of Education, focus on the idea of comprehensive or whole school reform, not just curricular reform. When looking at this, really there are multiple aspects that need to be considered. One, simply put, is who's going to buy into this. Okay, who do you have that needs to make sure that they understand what is going on. Okay. Secondly, who needs to be involved? These are two really are intrinsically tied together. Can you have a whole school reform if teachers aren't involved, or can you have whole school reform if it's just simply administration pushing it down people's throats? Do parents need to be involved? Thirdly, looking at data. Okay, what data should be used? What's reliable data? How do you know if you've been successful or not? How do you know what constitutes success? How do you evaluate these things? What data signifies that whole school reform is needed? Many of these questions are at face value, simply put, they seem very commonsensical, but really they're much deeper. Another point that needs to be considered is there a need for a change? Does your school or does your school district need to employ reform models such as this, or can it be simply done in a smaller or curricular way? The idea of whole school reform and the difficulty with change, especially attitudinal, is illustrated well in the article that I'm asking you to read from Toole in 1993, looking at barriers to this. Okay, if there's a need for change, can we admit it? Does everyone buy into it, and is that okay? Finally, in one of the controversial issues to this ties in with this need for change, and that has to do with outside interventions. Can this change happen in an organic way, or are the people involved in the schools too close to this to make it happen? Personally, I feel that outside intervention is probably needed. You need a fresh set of eyes to look at it. Maybe it's just another building in your district, maybe it's state officials, maybe it's federal officials, whatever. But the idea of outside intervention, I think, is critical. And really on the topic as a whole, I think whole school or comprehensive school reforms can be a very positive thing when handled in the correct way. When collaboration is center, when student learning is at the center of the process, I think these are good reforms. When they are punitive, top-down, very autocratic reforms or autocratically pushed reforms, I do not think they work. Finally, hopefully at the end of this, you come with a handful of understandings, and one of those presented is that this is a time-consuming process. It's not going to happen overnight. Results aren't going to be seen overnight. People need to be persistent with the reforms. They need to buy into the reforms, and they need to be given time to work. Some estimates have elementary whole school reform efforts seeing results in 3 years. Some high school whole school reform efforts look at 8 years or 6 years in order to see those results. Unfortunately, most of the time it's done in a very, very much a time crunch. Also, leadership is critical for reform efforts. You need to have positive building and district leadership in order to make these reforms work and stick, and you need to have consistent leadership. If you have principals retiring or teachers retiring or leaving during mid-cycle during the reform efforts, it really puts back the efforts a lot. Attitude is also critical. Problems need to be addressed. They need to be faced. They need to be acknowledged. And then the attitude of the participants comes full center. We need to have people who are working at a pace that does the problem justice, and that people who are solution oriented. Also, I think if you look at these reform efforts, many times monetary incentives have been shown to be somewhat productive, where schools can qualify for grant money or, for example, Race to the Top money, while punitive ideas have not shown promise. The idea that a school would be shut down, for instance, isn't enough to just advocate this change. Finally, can it be bottled? Can these models be applied to schools in many different aspects? in my professional opinion, I don't believe so. I believe certain frameworks, certain principles can be applied, but to take the reform movement in one school and simply drop it in and improve it to, or put it on another, doesn't work. If that were the case, everyone would have replicated Adlai Stevenson's success. This is taken from the San Diego Community School Unified School District, and really it addresses the main points of school reform. Okay, you need to build professional learning communities, positive attitudes and collaboration among teachers, students, administration. You need to use data in an effective way and be specific with the data you use. You need to engage parents and outside sources in order for them to adhere to this and to help the process move forward. And you need to be able to set goals and make sure that you meet those goals. Now, as a whole, again, personally, I feel that these whole school reform movements can be positive changes, but you have to make sure everybody's on board. You have to have positive attitude. You have to have very, very persuasive and positive leadership. All right, now there's some articles that I'd like you guys to read on the board, and really I'd just like you to discuss the essential questions. Thank you.